Hey everybody, it's Phil Strazula from Select Software Reviews, and I'm talking to Michelle Brown today about how do we use data to identify leaders within our organization. Michelle is the COO of Pinsight. Michelle, thanks so much for taking the time out. Do you mind giving a quick background on yourself and kind of how you got into doing this sort of work?
Yeah, you bet. I have a little bit of an uncommon title for my background. It is COO, but really I spend most of my days thinking about customer in general. So both wearing the sort of leader of customer success as well as sales, as well as marketing, because for us in the organization, it's really all under the banner of extraordinary customer experiences. But what leads me here a little bit uncommonly is, like many of the people in our organization, I come from a background in psychology. So I was in fact a psychologist. Many of the folks in our organization, in fact, our founder and CEO is an industrial and organizational psychologist, but I was a clinical psychologist, kind of like the lay on the couch kind of one for the first part of my career. But what that led me to do was really think about how do we enable change for people? How do we unlock their happiness and potential? And a lot of those frameworks that we use in individual therapy are really relevant to individuals in the workplaces and organizations. So from clinical psychologist, I went on to become a management consultant, where I was working with lots of organizations who wanted to undergo big organizational changes. They wanted to have a transformation, and they'd tried sort of policies and rule writing, but they really weren't getting the traction they needed at the individual level. They needed like people and leaders to change how they thought about things and felt about things and behaved about things. And that's the work that I got into as a specialist in how people think and feel and do things. And then from management consulting, seeing at that sort of one customer at a time level, I got really interested in how we use technology and data to be able to unearth trends inside organizations and then use that information to drive effectiveness and transformation. And that's really what led me to Pinsight over 5 years ago. And Pinsight is really that sort of intersection of behavioral science with technology. So we use all of what we know in behavioral science coupled with the best we have in technology to bring like deep research with efficiency and speed and cost effectiveness so that organizations can have better processes. At the core of our mission, it's about having high quality, fair processes that organizations can use to prepare people for leadership and have them perform well in leadership roles once they get there.
That's awesome. Thanks for explaining that. I love how your background is not, I was a product manager and then I I went for a tech company. I think it's really cool that you were sort of this, lay down on the couch sort of psychologist that we all, envision in our brains, the stereotypes, and how you've translated that into a career in sort of tech entrepreneurship. I would love to dive into what traits you think make a great leader in an organization.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you follow the media or the public media or the popular press, you would think that this changes on a month-to-month or a week-to-week basis of now we need leaders that can drive, 2 years ago, digital transformation. No, we need leadership skills to drive like hybrid workplaces. No, we need leaders that have empathy, and it's so much about strength of leadership is obviously about organizational strategy and the needs of the individuals, the stage that an organization at, as well as the external environment, the context. But when we think about strong leadership performance, there's some really sound fundamentals, and obviously, what we need to dial up and dial down is important to think about in terms of the organization stage and strategy and the environmental context. But what we want to think about when we think about strong leaders is, do they have the skills to help the organization propel and move forward and be competitive and have a sort of an advantage in the market? but that they can also be additive to the employees, that they're retaining great staff, that they can inspire their workers to do great work, that they're retained well. So whenever we start with that question of what is a good leader, it's sort of, we'll start with the outcome in mind. What do you need leaders to do? What do you sort of see them, produce? And that then gives us the starting point to say, okay, what are the characteristics that's going to make someone help the organization compete well, but as well as being able to attract and retain great people? Let's look at the data. And so for us and the work that we have done in looking at all the research, our own, as well as the catalogs of information, there is, strong leaders are really in possession of two pillars, if you will, of skills. The first is results leadership. Can they lead results in an organization? Can they have good critical thinking skills? Do they know how to think through solutions? Do they know how to land on making a decision? Decision making is in fact a skill. Can they do they possess the skills to organize and to make change and to execute? So there's this whole pillar of results leadership that's important for us to think about. But equally important as the people leadership aspects, how much leaders can, like I mentioned, sort of attract, but in fact, inspire their team members to do great work, to communicate in a clear way, to delegate the right kind of tasks in the right way for their people, the way their skills in coaching, and of course their skills in demonstrating care. And so it's these sort of two pillars of leadership that's really important when thinking about what is a strong leader, and those are the types of things that are important to measure. I will just say, though, that we just completed and released a piece of research that broke this idea of general leadership skills down even further to say, does it matter where you are in the leadership pipeline? Do you need a certain set of skills to be good at a frontline versus a mid-level leader versus an executive? Because we often see this sort of trajectory that you're an individual contributor and then you get your first promotion and then the next promotion, assuming it's just kind of more of the same good stuff. But in fact, it's quite possible that you might have a leader in possession of some of the great skills to be very high performing in the front line. That is strong communication, strong delegation, strong demonstration of caring. But you might not always be in possession of the skills that makes you a good mid-level leader, because there it's skills around execution and communication and influencing. It's possible that you might be in possession of skills or potential that could make you a great executive, because they're the skills that, executives need to be much more comfortable with ambiguity, and they've got to be much more comfortable to work with uncertainty. So they're needing to use a different set of skills. So I suppose that is all to say, what is a good leader? If you, again, look at the popular press, or if you go to any bookshop and look in the leadership catalog, you'll get some great stories about people of the past. But I think HR leaders, when they're thinking about how are we going to find and place and grow great leaders, need to think about the context of the organization. They need to think about where they are now, but also what stage of the pipeline is this sort of target leader at, and start to sort of really refine it down to what do we need here in this role right now.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I'm relating this, I guess, to your background a bit. It's almost like there's the results-oriented aspect of things is sort of like a strategy consultant. Like you have to be a systems thinker, understanding, hey, this is the right decision so that we can hit XYZ goal. And then the other part of it is more of the empathetic psychologist part of things, where it's how do I get this person underneath me to perform at their highest level? It's authenticity, it's empathy. And when I think about all these different traits, I'm wondering, how do you take a data-driven approach to identify who's doing a good job as a leader in your company?
Yeah, and I think this is often where it's hard for HR to sort of sometimes wrap their arms around, because a lot of what I've just talked about is so often in the the realm of sort of soft skills, or they can sort of feel ambiguous or very sort of perceived, rather than, we kind of have like an intuitive sense of someone who's a good leader. Well, was that a good leader for this project and this team in this moment, or do they possess the skills that can make them a great leader over here as well with a different team and project? And so this is where we try to really bring this back to like this skills idea, that while I might talk about something like authenticity or empathy or communication, and that can feel kind of like squishy and a bit hard to pin down, what we can do and what we have done is really pin down what are those like hard skills and hard behaviors that are tracking with measuring those performances. And what I mean by that is, when we've measured leaders and we sort of document and categorize and sort of put a whole lot of numbers around their particular behaviors, then we watch them over time, we get this long range view of saying, it's the leaders that ask open-ended questions at a ratio of X to Y, or it's the leaders that, whose emails are brief and to the point with 1 to 2 asks per email, that really seem to do well, for example. So we have done, rather than these sort of global sort of soft ideas of leadership, our method is really to try to boil it down into hard, observable, very actionable skills, so that we can codify, if you will, what leadership looks like in the real world. And so that means that it makes it easier for organizations to spot what good leadership looks like, but it also makes it much, much easier for us to build measurement tools and measurement processes around them, because now we know, it's these behaviors that really count, not so much of this anymore, or it's these things that we really want to improve and work on versus these things that really don't have much predictive power in determining what happens to someone. So with that sort of gives us a way of really sort of getting data around someone's current performance, so we can watch them and see how they perform, but then we can also start to measure their potential. And that's a little bit of sort of the methodology that we use at Pinsight, which is observing someone's behavior in a simulated work environment, and then codifying it and being able to get a very numbers-based report out.
Got it. So this data exists in, I guess, mostly written communication, and then we're taking this all in and understanding, for a given role, who are the performers and what are the commonalities across them.
Yeah, but I think the difficulty that, all of those behaviors exist in the various meetings and emails and all the things that, and documents that we prepare out there, but that's very hard to sort of bring together and code. And so what we have done, the method that we use, is putting leaders in a standardized simulated business environment, in the same way you would, train and evaluate an airline pilot or like a high-performing surgeon, for example. We put them in a simulated environment with a standardized set of, what are real challenges, but it's a very low risk environment. And we say, okay, here's the situation, go ahead and perform. And we sort of hit them with a whole range of common, very realistic leadership challenges, from sort of a customer crisis, sort of strategic issues to solve, ambiguous problems to decipher, team challenges. And we pop them in this simulated environment, which means that we get this very controlled, very standardized way of watching someone behave. And it's the behavior that we can then track and say, okay, now I know can code that. I can compare it to my benchmarks and algorithms, and now I get this full view of what someone is in possession of versus, what someone might be still learning or struggling with as they're developing. And this is what gives us this objectivity and a way to say, this is the catalog of skills that this person possesses. This is where they're extraordinarily strong in comparison to other leaders. This is where they're about average, versus this is the areas and the behaviors that they could improve and build up, so that they want to focus on that down the track, and these are the things I should develop further.
And is your philosophy that people can change pretty dramatically?
Yes, I'm glad you asked, because that is the other data source that we gather, is not just current performance, but also potential. It is a core tenet of our values that people possess inside them opportunities and strengths and superpowers that can be unlocked when they're getting good information and good reflection and good development and good feedback. And so one of the sort of valid data sources that we gather is measuring somebody's potential, like how, what's their general comfort and aptitude for growth, and what should we expect? But we want to put realistic expectations on them. And yes, I have absolutely seen people really transform their careers just from getting a data back to say, hey, you might not have gotten the most sort of clean or objective feedback in the past because maybe you've been at this organization for 20 years, or maybe you're getting feedback through the perspective of maybe your managers that they themselves weren't terribly skilled. But here, let me tell you about everything that you possess and how much you can grow and how much you can do. And we've just seen so many stories of people just having really personally transformative experience by hearing and seeing a different way to see their skills and all the things that they can do.
And what sort of an impact does it have on an organization to sort of identify and level up leaders?
Yeah, the first thing that, leaders do often, it's organizations come to us when they're just saying, we just don't know if we trust the data that we have. We're using an outdated system, or we're doing a talent review, or we're relying on performance ratings, but that's kind of confounded because it's attached to our sort of compensation review. And, this data we have about talent, we just don't feel good that it's a good source. We don't know if it's trustworthy, clean, high quality data. And we just aren't able to get the information out of it to help us make those one-to-one selection decisions, or give good career coaching, or how to invest in people. But more so, we don't have any good data sources to be able to help us plan and strategize and think about talent more globally. And so when organizations are ready for this shift, it's usually because they're looking for that step up of more trustworthy data in a way that they can work with individually and globally. And one of the studies that we did in 2019 was asking organizations, and I think we surveyed about 130 organizations, and asked them, how are you evaluating leaders for their current performance and their growth potential? And I think that 90% of organizations were saying, we're using opinion-based data. We're asking managers to find time and have the skill to evaluate leader performance and leadership potential. But in the same study, we also found that managers themselves possesses some, unintentional biases around what good leadership looks like and what good leadership potential looks like. And it's sort of these moments that leaders have this aha moment of, we could be doing a better job of getting good, high quality data, making better decisions, and really accelerating the performance of our leaders, increasing retention, increasing productivity in our organization, and not doing more damage to protected classes. And more importantly, finding great talent that's sitting right in front of us that maybe our process didn't allow for in the past. So I think that's really the incredible good news stories that we hear, is when organizations are ready to say, we're ready to lean into more trustworthy, evidence-based decisions.
That's great. I know before we started recording, you said you could talk about this stuff for hours, and I don't doubt that's true. Unfortunately, we're sort of out of time, but I'm curious if somebody is watching this and says, hey, this is super interesting, where's a good place for them to learn more, or maybe even to get in contact with you?
Yeah, for sure. We have boatloads of information on our Pinsight website that tells you about how to think about potential, how to think about performance. How do you want to select a good assessment tool? If you Google nothing at all, Google, how to find the best assessment tool for measuring leaders, because at least then those HR leaders out there can start feeling like they're getting good quality data back into the system. And once you start feeding good information into the system, trends start naturally emerging. And there's a whole range of tools out there, from the very cheap and the very fast But I would say if you're going to select good tools, always look for ones that are validated, otherwise you're getting sort of a horoscope kind of tool. But also look for tools that are not going to do more damage to people based on race or gender or age or any of the other protected classes there, because there's certainly a lot of tools that can unfortunately build damage into the processes. So I would say if leaders want to know more about identifying good leadership skills, start by finding an assessment tool that you can implement into your organization and start watching how the data starts to tell a really incredible story for the individuals, but also the organization as well.
Thanks, Michelle, for spending the time with us and sharing your knowledge.
It's a great pleasure. Anytime.